The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has foreshadowed a dire increase to inflation and warned the cost of living in Australia will get worse before it gets better. And now the danger of stagflation looms for the global economy, suggesting the Australian government will struggle to meet perhaps its pre-election promises around real wage growth and budget repair. Joining me live is the Assistant Minister for Trade and Manufacturing, Tim Ayres. Tim, great to see you. Is that now the new reality, that real wages growth in this country is going to be very hard to achieve?
Well, it's certainly the case that we're sitting against the backdrop of 10 years of historically low wage growth and for many workers, wage cuts. It's certainly the case that we're facing a very tough inflationary environment as a consequence of complacency and economic mismanagement. These are very significant pressures that the modern economy is facing. We're working hard as a government to make sure that we get on top of those challenges, but also, as you've indicated, Jim Chalmers is doing a fantastic job of getting out there and making sure that we're explaining the situation to Australians, making sure that we're treating Australians like adults and that they have a common understanding of the challenges that the economy is facing.
Explaining it to Australians and Australians not getting essentially what was promised. I mean, Labor has been talking about real wages growth for the better part of 5 years, if not 10 years in opposition. Now you seem to be saying that it's going to be too difficult to deliver.
No, I don't think it's too difficult to deliver. There's two big differences, between us and the previous government. The previous government had low wage growth as a design feature of their wages system. They meant to keep wages low. So profits increased, productivity increased, but wages went backwards or stayed steady. Now, that's the second difference is we're all about upward pressure on wages. We want to do it in a sustainable way. We want to do it in a way that means that wages keep pace with increases in the cost of living. So we're chalk and cheese with the previous government on these questions. Australians can count on Labor to be focused on putting upward pressure on wages. We are not going to allow, workers to fall behind. Under the previous government, there was no circumstance in which the previous government supported wage growth for ordinary workers. If inflation was high, they were against it. If inflation was low, they were against it. If the fiscal position of the government was tight, they were against wage growth. If the fiscal position of the government was strong, they were against wage growth. There was never an environment where the Morrison government supported wage growth.
When you talk about the deliberate design feature, I remind our viewers that was actually Matthias Cormann that said that in an interview with me on this very program. I think it's been much repeated back to me so many times, but to play devil's advocate for a moment, could I suggest that Matthias Cormann was talking about it as a design feature to avoid things like stagflation, which is now being discussed as a real prospect, not in Australia, but in the global economy? Well,
I think Matthias Cormann belled the cat there when he did that interview. That's why it was significant. That's why that interview has been repeated so many times. I mean, there was no inflationary pressure in the Australian economy, over much of that period. Now, we've got an inflation shock and we're in a position where, there are other pressures on the government, including $1 trillion, well north of $1 trillion in projected debt with very little to show for it. Now, there is a requirement to think carefully about the wages system and the way that the wages system operates today in the modern economy, and make sure that there is a sophisticated approach. Now, we've supported a wage increase for minimum rates for the lowest paid workers that's put significant upward pressure on their wages and means that for low-paid workers, many of them frontline workers in retail and hospitality, in aged care, across those professions that have had to work so hard during during the COVID period, we've made sure that there's upward pressure on their wages. The employer union summit that Anthony Albanese is calling later this year will be an opportunity for there to be a broad discussion across industry, across the employer community, across the trade union community about how Australians can work together to lift wages, lift productivity and deal with the big national challenges that we're facing.
Last week when we had you on this show, we put to you the prospect of allowing pensioners to work more before it starts affecting their pension payment. And voila, the opposition is now suggesting that is something you should adopt as policy. Have you had any more time to think about that? Do you think it's a good idea? Will you do it?
Well, I think it's an odd thing, isn't it, to have a government that loses government in its first few weeks of opposition, telling a new government what it should do. They had 9 years to implement these kinds of policies.
Sure.
I think my colleagues have indicated, and I agree, that this should be one of the issues that are canvassed in the lead up to this summit. It's certainly not a blanket no. There are challenges involved in adopting the approach that you've suggested. Be interested in hearing more from industry. In my portfolio
what are the
area,
challenges, Tim?
employers in the manufacturing sector.
What are the challenges?
I think there are some fiscal challenges involved, I want to make sure that this kind of approach provides real flexibility for people as they're going into retirement. It is tougher in some sectors, that the issues for workers approaching retirement in, say, construction, physically very demanding jobs, are different to some other sectors. So in agriculture, horticulture, where the toll on people's bodies is pretty tough. We've got to make sure that people are being looked after in their retirement. I'm interested, Laura, in your proposal. It's good to see Sky being a policy development institute as well. I think that's a good contribution to the public debate. And I look forward to hearing more about it from colleagues across industry as we're approaching the summit.
Tim, we will speak soon. Looking forward to that summit. Thanks so much.
On you, Laura.